In the previous video, we looked at a tiny computer from Samsung called the Q1. So continuing on the theme of small computers, well, relatively small, here is my 12-inch iBook G3. It's about 25 centimeters wide and about 20 centimeters deep, yet this is a full computer. On the left-hand side are all the ports, starting with a 56K modem, a 10100 Ethernet, Firewire 400, two USB 1.1 ports, and a mini VGA connector. These connectors are non-standard, proprietary alternatives used in some laptops and other systems in place of a standard VGA connector. Apple, HP and Asus have separate implementations using the same name. On this generation of iBook, VGA can only mirror what is shown on the internal display. Let's open the display and power it up. On the right-hand side is a CD-ROM, which is of the tray style, and a power connector. The power connector has an orange ring that glows when charging, or when the battery is fully charged, glows green. Under the display are two stereo speakers, which for a laptop of its time aren't too bad, but they don't fill a room and lack bass. The iBook G3 iBook, as it was nicknamed, originally shipped with 64 MB of RAM soldered to the motherboard, but Apple increased this to 128 in October 2001. The memory is expandable to either 576 or 640 MB using a PC100 SO-DIMM memory module. Not only was this revision of the iBook one of the first with a built-in microphone, it was one of the first consumer laptops with a 12-inch display running at 1024 by 768. It also introduced Apple's trademark hinge that opens the lid behind the computer. Not only did Apple increase the base RAM on the CD-ROM model, but switched to a 15GB hard drive, which was great news as upgrading the hard drive on these laptops is akin to some kind of medieval torture. Adding an airport card and more memory is thankfully a vastly easier affair. There are two tabs on the keyboard between the function keys that you pull forward and the whole keyboard can be lifted up to reveal an airport card slot. Below that is a metal cover, which covers a memory expansion slot and can be removed after taking out a screw. macOS 9.2.2 is installed as well as macOS 10.4.8. The operating systems which are installed are the latest that support this machine, and either can be set as the default operating system. It's fun to play with these old versions of software. Here, for example, is iTunes 2.0.4. This version was the first version to support the newly released iPod music player. There are no problems opening some 12 megapixel images taken on my iPhone whilst on holiday, and the G3 500 MHz processor makes quick work of basic tasks. In 2001, when this computer was released, professional DSLR digital cameras with between 2 and 5 megapixels were on the market, so I find it quite impressive how quickly the 12 megapixel images open. The optional airport card is installed in this iBook, but it's the original generation, which is 802.11b. The software in macOS 9 only supports WEP encryption, which is more than useless in today's world. To get my old computers online, I use an original Airport Extreme base station as a bridge. Opening Internet Explorer errors as this browser doesn't support the encryption methods used by modern websites. Google seems to load but doesn't render correctly due to the more complex CSS that IE can understand. There is a more modern browser called Classilla. Classilla website describes what they're doing as Classilla is bringing back web browser support to your classic Macintosh, a port of Mozilla to classic systems using the same technology underpinnings as the popular Firefox browser. It works fairly well and renders websites much better than IE. Sadly, support for the classic macOS was killed off by Steve Jobs at WWDC 2002, just over a year after the release of this machine. Getting files on and off retro computers can be a chore, but if you have some patience and a bit of know-how, it can be done. As all iBooks shipped with USB, I thought it might be quite interesting to see how slow USB 1.1 is compared to today. It was lauded as a vastly superior bus than SCSI, and was hot swappable with much higher bandwidth. So I copied over 850 megabytes of video to a USB memory stick and then copied them to the internal drive. I roughly timed the progress to see how long it would take. To my surprise, the Finder soon told me that it would take approximately 18 minutes to complete this operation. Surely not. This means transfer rates of just over half a megabyte a second, So much for the 1.5 megabytes or 12 megabits promised. Luckily, this iBook has a secret weapon. It has FireWire. FireWire is a much faster bus than USB and has over 33 times the bandwidth. I'll be showing off some FireWire devices in a future episode, so stay tuned. I didn't leave the camera rolling for the duration of the copy, but it did indeed nearly take 18 minutes. I have a Samsung T5 drive which uses USB 3 and has read and write speeds of over 500 megabytes per second, and that's not even one of the fastest drives out there. It boggles the mind to think how fast data transfer speeds will be in another 20 years' time. Where the G3 processor falls down is video decoding using the MPEG-4 video codec. I downloaded the Bourne Ultimatum trailer and transcoded it from H.264 using Handbrake. One of the highly publicised features of macOS 10.4 Tiger was the new version of QuickTime 7, Apple's multimedia software, with support for the new H.264 codec. A fast G4 processor is required to decode the video, however, as hardware-accelerated encoding was still a few years away. Playback of these videos was choppy and had an annoying clicking sound every second or so I decided to reboot into macOS 10.4 Tiger to see if it would play back any better. To do this, you open the control panel called Startup Disk and are presented with a list of bootable volumes. You can still do this today in the most recent release of macOS 10, so it's nice to see where this came from. Booting into macOS 10.4 Tiger takes about 35 seconds, which is impressive by today's standards. My MacBook Pro, with its super-fast NVMe SSD, still takes around 25 seconds from a cold boot to be at the desktop, and my MacBook Pro is a full 16 years younger than the iBook. So if we navigate to the macOS 9 volume where I copied the videos to and open them up, we can see that playback isn't very much better. At least the clicking in the audio has stopped, but the video just won't play anything more than a few frames. Oh well, what was I expecting? The other video I copied over was Flight Plan with Jodie Foster. The playback of this video is much more acceptable, and it's actually watchable, save for the odd drop frame here or there. It took me a while to adopt macOS 10 back in the day, as I couldn't afford to pay for the software upgrades that were required to take advantage of the new features. Most of the time I ran Classic, even though I could run my Classic apps in macOS 10 in the Classic environment. At least if the Classic environment crashed, the rest of the operating system was unaffected. I don't remember exactly what made me switch, but I'm glad I did. Whilst I still remember how to use Classic macOS, macOS 10's way of doing things, for the most part, is just much more efficient. And of course, I would have never been able to have synchronized music, videos and contacts over to my iPhone. The original iPhone required version 7 something of iTunes, and the latest version of iTunes for Classic was 2.0.4, which we've just looked at. In the next video, we'll see what I eventually replaced my iBook G3 with. Well, strictly speaking, it was a PC, but we'll ignore that and we'll have a look at the G4 Mac Mini, which was released in 2005. Thanks for watching, see you in the next one.